Welcome. This is our Friday webinar, and our topic for today is data exploration in DataGraph. And we're going to use a Nobel Prize data set to demonstrate a number of different techniques. Some of the things I want to show you are using Quick Graph, using the data table actually as a way to just find data. Pivoting is definitely a big part of what we are going to do today, and also using the hover. So yes, this is your weekly dose of DataGraph. I just uploaded a few moments ago the file that you're about to see on the example files. Again, this is a file that you can access if you go into File, Online Examples, into the Dataset section. You should see this now, Nobel Prize data. So you don't have to download it all yourself. All the data is there. If you want to get the data, then you see it's downloaded from nobelprize.org, but specifically the place that I got this data from was using this API link to download it. And I sent earlier, when I advertised this webinar, I sent a link to a Kaggle version of the data set. I was actually having trouble with the API working. I don't know, for some reason, I just wasn't typing in the link correctly, but I got that to work. So if you're using the Kaggle data set, it has a lot of the same things that are in this one. If you've already downloaded it and have played with it, it's going to be very similar. The only thing is that it will be, it only goes to 2019 is when it goes to, I believe. So this data set is coming right from their API, and it is, it contains everything. So if you just go to and paste this link into a browser, for example, it will download that CSV file, and then you can open that up directly in DataGraph. And what you'll see when you do that is the table that you see here. There are actually two main tables that they have for data. One is based on laureates, one is based on prizes. They actually contain the same number of rows. Even though this is the laureate table, you have certain laureates repeated. Every row is a time that someone was given the Nobel Prize. So for example, here you have Marie Curie given the Nobel Prize twice, once for physics, once for chemistry. And so I'm using the laureates. I was originally using actually the other table, and then I realized it's essentially the same data. There's just a lot more columns in this one, and it contains some other information that I was interested in learning about. First thing to show you would be Quick Graph. How do we get a better understanding of this data using this technique? Well, first of all, I guess I'll just point out, you can look down below and you'll see the number of rows within this table. This is going to show you right off the bat how many prizes have been given. But if I want to know more information, then I can go to any column, and for example, the prizes themselves, how many prizes have been given per category. There's a category column. If I then hit the space bar, then I get a pop-up that shows me all of the prizes that have been given and the different categories. This is I've shown this multiple times, but if any of you are new or haven't seen this before, this is such a handy tool for exploring data like this. This is essentially pivoting the data using a template that we've set up, and it's counting the number of times each one of these has been given. And it's sort of interesting to see that they're not the same. I didn't quite realize that when I started delving into this data. The prize for economics, can't remember now the exact year, we'll look at that it started. That was did not start with the original prize, but there are different numbers of people given the prize per year. So that's why we have a different number of prizes in different categories. Okay, then we'll delve into more, what does this look like? Why do these look so different? But continuing with Quick Graph, another thing that was of interest to me was to look at the gender. So I have Quick Graph up. I don't have to hit the space bar again. I can just select a different column, and it will update and show me here that the number of females versus organizations versus males. And as you can see, there's certainly a dominant number of the prizes have been given to males, and this is an issue that the givers of the Nobel Prize have been thinking about quite a bit. There was since I wanted to read a little bit more about this, because I was sort of surprised that it was low. I thought maybe it would be a little higher. There have been debates about whether there should be some number designated to go to female versus male or any kind of goals, but the sense was that they didn't want to impose anything like that. They wanted every prize to be felt as though everyone who got it deserved it. So, and we'll look more by category to see how those vary. Another thing that I thought was interesting was looking at the country that people came from, and we can do that here quickly. Again, if you look first, this column is the country that people were born in, and you see there's a lot of different countries here. Now, if you're used to DataGraph and used to zooming in on a section of a graph, obviously this would be very hard to see all of the countries. You would know that you can click and drag on a graph to zoom. Now with the quick graph, and it just did, let me actually, this doesn't have undo. I can just unzoom. Let me just show you what happens if the quick graph is in the middle of your file and you click and drag, then by default, it's dragging the window. So if you want to zoom in on a section of the graph, you need to have the quick graph all the way to the side or up to the top. Then you can click and drag and it will highlight a section and we can zoom in on that. Once you're zoomed in, then you can hover over the axis, just like this is the same way it works in a normal graph. You can move this sliding bar to zoom in on a section. And then you'd see with this that in terms of where people were born, the largest number comes from the US and then UK, Germany, France. I thought about trying to do this more by continent. I didn't have a chance to do that, but you certainly could explore that further in that way. So I was actually surprised that given this, that so many were from the US, I thought maybe there would be a slightly different distribution. In any case, this is what it is. And yet, interestingly, if we move from the born country to the, let's see, there's one that just says country. Here it is over on the right-hand side here. So if you click on this one, you see that a lot of these researchers moved to different countries where they actually conducted their research. And again, a lot of the research being conducted in the US, certainly a lot also in Europe. And again, kind of an interesting way to look at the data. So that's how Quick Graph works for text data. Again, very useful to see. If we clicked, however, on, let me do one of these with a number column. So if you go to the year column, for example, this is going to do a histogram. So you get a different graph because it's a different data type. And the statistics on, all this data are shown here. And you can see, again, that the number of prizes so this is the number of individuals receiving a prize over time. And this may not be, this likely is not per year because it's a histogram, it's binning in a certain way using just automatic defaults. But you can see that, yes, there's a lot more recipients are currently get the prize now than used to. So it's up to 3 people per year can get any particular prize. Let me do more. There was one more technique I wanted to show you. Let me hide the data list, because one of the things that I often do, and I don't think I've shown this a lot in our webinars, is just searching the data table itself. So Quick Graph is one way, but if you wanted to, for example, see a list of all the female prize winners, there we go. So I can go ahead and do Command F. or sorry, I'm doing this from memory and now I'm not working. Why am I not working here? There we go. I guess I just had to hit it a little bit more forcefully. Maybe worried that somehow I was forgetting the right command. Okay, so you can see here, I had done this before and I was looking for how many people from China had received the Nobel Prize. So people born in China, for example. So if you do this, you can see the list of them, and we can go ahead and see also the number of people down below. And what this will do when you're using the find is it will find by default, when you turn on Command F, it will have this option where it says displayed. There we go, displayed text contains, and then you can type in any text. So if I want to type in female, for example, it's searching the entire table for the word female. So in this case, it is returning everywhere where the gender column is female, but if there were other columns that had female, then that would also return those. If you want to search just on a particular column, so for example, if I wanted to see the born country, if I want to only look at the country people were born in, let me actually, maybe I'll change this to, let's go ahead and do France. So now, right now, this is going to return every column that has the word France. So you can see whether someone's born or died or lived, it's going to show that in my data table. But if I only want to pick one column, there's a drop-down menu. You'll see the group that this is in, the laureate group, and you can pick the column. But what I do all the time is just clicking on the column header and dragging and dropping it right onto this drop-down menu. This is the same mechanism that works with the commands for menus to populate them. And then if I do that, there is one bug in this that we found, that it needs to be updated for, so you may have to hit enter again. We're going to fix this. And actually that didn't make really a big difference. Let me pick a different column so you can really see. So here we'll try, there we go. So no one died in France when they were a Nobel laureate. If I want to go back to see everyone, I can go back to displayed. Again, it's going to require you to hit enter at this point. That's an update issue that we need to fix. But this is a really helpful thing to do. And yeah, getting some positive feedback on the quick graph. And people who don't necessarily know it's there. I didn't know it myself for a while, and it is kind of an amazing thing to start using once you realize it's there. And it will also do, for those of you who I can see on the chat, people who weren't used or did not know, that weren't aware of the quick graph, you can also do multiple columns, but those would be have to be numerical columns. So with this data, I don't know what would really make sense. Maybe year versus, we'll just pick 2 number columns, versus share. And if I highlight 2 number columns and hit the space bar, this isn't really going to make much sense, but it gives a linear relationship between the 2. And you can actually highlight up to, I believe it's 4 number columns, and it will do a matrix of linear regressions between the numerical variables. The only other thing maybe to say about the find, if you use it, is that it is very specific to data type. So if you want to specifically match numbers, then you will want to say value equal to. So for example, if I wanted to find where the share was equal to 4, then I would have to compose that entire logical statement. And just let me explain actually a little bit of what the share column is. Because the prize can be shared among multiple recipients, again, 3 recipients per year, but it isn't necessarily shared equally among those recipients. So if the share says 4, then that means 1/4, this person received 1/4 of the prize. And that's why over here, I actually calculated in an expression, I added this in to calculate the fraction that someone received of the prize rather than just the share of it, since that's useful in the pivoting that I did. So you've seen the quick graph, you've seen how to filter data live within the data table. So both of those techniques are live ways to explore and filter data. But now let's talk more about the graphs that I did here and show you some aspects of how I created them. First of all, because I knew I would use the same categories, because I particularly did, I did some graphs or a couple of graphs here on the categories of the Nobel Prize, and also categorizing based on whether it's a male, female, or organization that received the prize. So I wanted to create some color schemes that I would consistently be able to use. And those are down here in the variable section of the data table. So to create a color scheme, you can do it from scratch, just using the other menu, and there's a color scheme option. And if you're not familiar with this, I'd recommend going to the forum and go to the help document for the color scheme. You can do that, just click the gear menu and go to that. That'll bring you to the help article to show you more on how to create these. But basically I did one for the male, female organization, and then also for the category. And again, if you're not totally familiar with the color schemes, the way that they work is that this portion of the color scheme, the text that's typed in here, I'm matching text to determine the color. This is what you see in the data table. The field here is what I can use if I do a custom legend. So my legend actually does not show that right now because it's using the default legend. But if I created a custom legend, which I could do, then it will use whatever I type in here. Anyway, just so you see a little bit about that. And to change these colors, you just click on one of these tiles, and then you can use the color picker, or type in, let's see, I think this is it. You can type in hex codes, RGB codes, things like that, hex color. So what I did actually was I was kind of curious about what colors to pick for gender, and I found what I thought was a really well done blog post on gender that I put gender color that I put a link to in here, and I picked my colors kind of based on some of the information that were in there. So there's no standard for this. If anything, the point was that sometimes people continue to use blue and pink, but there's a lot of other colors that people are choosing. So if you're interested in why I chose these, then you can go to that link. And for the categories, I just picked some colors that I thought looked good in my graphs. And again, if you're not familiar with this, there are color suggestions. If you click this gear menu, that you can pick one of these color suggestions and then kind of modify from there. And that's what I did with the category data in particular. Actually, everything you see here is done with a pivot command. Since that's the case, let me just go ahead and do a simple pivot of one of well, I'll do the category because that's the first one that we have here. Go ahead and close this. And here we go. Here's the category. So to start, you could create a pivot command. There is a shortcut here in the toolbars in the default setting. So you could just click the pivot command on its own, but if you pre-select the data, that is an easy way to start. So I'll pre-select my category column, click on the pivot command, and now I have a simple graph where the action that's taking place is shown here, the calculation, it's doing the count, and it chooses some automatic options depending on whether it's a number column or a text column. So here it is just counting each category. And if you want to see more details, so let me go ahead and swap my view so that you can see this a little bit better. Here you can see a table of the data itself. So these are the counts. And the other thing that we often do is, or I often do, is use the option of changing the order. So it's really nice to be able to order these automatically. You can also add the counts in. So there you have them. Now to go from this graph to the representation that's here, again, you can see if you hover over any of these commands, it'll tell you what it is. These are pivot commands. To do that, we would do a stacked graph. And the key here, though, however, is to group not by row, because you see how the, actually, I'll bring it back to standard. Just maybe the way that I think is helpful to understand this is if you add a legend. So here you see I've added a legend. And what I'm wanting to do is to add the color scheme into this. And for the pivot command, the color scheme is going to work for whatever categories are in the legend. And right now, my categories are actually along the axis. So the way to swap this so I can apply a color scheme, because right now, the way the pivoting works, these are all going to be the same color no matter what. There's no, the categories along the axis, not in the legend. To change that, instead of grouping by row, you can group by column. And then, and these are all in the same column, so they create one group along the x-axis here, but this is what I'm trying to recreate that I have here. You can see it says all down at the bottom. So now I have a different color for categories. I can now stack this for those categories. I'd probably want to put my label instead at the end. We could put that in the middle. And again, I want to apply the color scheme. So I already created the color schemes, and I'm just going to change my fill from a solid to color scheme. And then that changes the options that you see here. Right now it says color with nothing. I've already created the color scheme for this, so I can just select it. And now I have my my stacked graph with my color scheme. So the same technique was used to create both of these graphs, but to have them together, this is actually a split graph. So here, if we took this and split the x-axis, now we can put two graphs here. And what I do all the time is not, you know, I wouldn't start the next one from scratch again. I would take this object, use my, what I love to do, the option drag technique. So hold the option key, click and drag to make a clone of of this command, put this guy on the right-hand side. And now instead of category, I'm going to change this one to gender. But the color scheme I chose isn't for gender. So I do need to go in, change that color scheme, and then I have the graph. And if I want to change the order that these are in, I can do that as well. So essentially that's how these graphs here are created, with the pivot, grouping in the right way that gets us the ability to add the color scheme, and then the sorting in the way that makes sense for you. The other graphs that you see here are similarly made with the pivot command, but they have more, not just pivoting on one column, but you're using another column. So let's look at this one here, where, again, hover over, here's a pivot, here's another pivot. We have actually two sections here, the recipients, the prizes. And in terms of, I guess, just the data, now what we're doing is, instead of just counting the number of prizes overall, now we've added in a time aspect to this. So we have the year on the x-axis. And that's the main thing that's different here. So you can see how this has the rows are year, the columns are category. Whenever you're confused with the pivot command about, did I choose the things I should have chose, you know, it's always helpful just to go in and look at the table that's being created. So you can see the categories going across the top, the years going along the bottom. Now for this one, I did have to change the default to map these to unique values. If you go back to see what does the automatic do, that's going to group things per decade, which honestly, that's sort of an interesting thing graph to see as well. But if you want to see every year, then you can go ahead and change this to unique values, and you see the graph that you see here. Now, one thing that's key in creating this graph, since I have two different pivot commands, using the hide is a great way to clarify which command is doing which. This one is actually summing, and it's using this fraction that I calculated that I showed you before in order to calculate a value of 1 every time a prize was given. And because again, you have a table where there's more than one, it's repeated every time there's a person. So you're listing really recipients of the prize. But if you just wanted to see when a prize was given, this gives me a way to show that. So you can see, for example, during World War I and World War II, again, I can click and zoom in on this, on both of these. There were years where very few prizes were given, or prizes just were not given at all. And if you want to zoom back out again, we can go ahead and do that. You can also see where the prize for economics started. So visually, I can also, to pick out what year did the prize for economics start, you can kind of look at this and see, well, it's 1969. But another thing that we can do is use the hover. Shift Command H will turn on the hover. Now I can hover over any of these bars and it will tell me some information about that. And I didn't have to set this up at all. This is automatically done in the pivot. So it's telling me the year and telling me the prize and telling me the number that's associated with the count of those. So it's basically giving me back what is the row, what is the column, and what is the number. And the other thing that's really cool here is if I want to drill into this data and see who got the award for the first time the award for economics was given, I can right click on this and now say select underlying rows. And it's going to bring me right to that point in the table so that I can see who received the award and what they received it for is also in here. So that's a really nice thing to be able to go back and forth between the actual graph and the table itself in order to drill into the data. Let me go ahead again and I can zoom this back out. So so I thought this was sort of interesting to see, pretty consistently now every year a prize was given, but again, was not the case previously, but yet the number of recipients has changed quite a bit. So there are some years where almost every, again, I can zoom in to this year where the most recipients, well, the most people were given the Nobel Prize in 2001. And then I can see, well, how many prizes were given in each category. Go ahead and zoom this back out again. So the remaining graphs that we have here are, again, they're all pivot commands, just doing slightly different things here. Actually, this one I am using a custom legend. So you can see this is using the full organization name here that I had typed in to that color scheme. And so there's no big trick other than what I've basically shown you, selecting the columns. Here, I guess I changed this to go in the Y direction as opposed to the X direction. I also, sometimes I prefer these bars to be a bit thinner. The default is to have it a bit wider. And this is just counting the number of prizes total, but now breaking it up by gender. So you can see, where have women received a lot of prizes? Well, in particular for the Peace Prize, for literature, for medicine. And actually, I guess the other thing here that I did is you'll see, again, depending on the data type, you'll have different options for what's available for sorting. So I chose to sort this by the number of females that received a prize, but you could change this to sort by, the number of males or the organization. So for me, this, that was what I was interested in. So that's how I sorted this. And then here again, this is what I talked about earlier with if you're mapping, I left this in the automatic section. So here you have year as your row, and it's summing over decade. And the other thing that's done here is to actually filter the data. So that is shown here now using a mask. So if you have not used groups to apply a mask, depending on how new you are to DataGraph, a mask is a great way to just hone in on the data that you're interested in. Every command has a use as mask section, but you can also create a group. The group icon link is over here to create them. And then when you place a command within a group, the logic that you have stated here, sort of similar to the find that we did on the data table. This is saying a column, so this is filtering on category. It's filtering the text. And this particular type of a mask, what we call a text is mask, is actually changing the data depending on this variable here. So if I want to show for chemistry, I can change that drop-down menu and again, look at how it varies in terms of male, female versus organization, literature, medicine. The Peace Prize in particular, again, is pretty evenly split actually in recent decades between these three categories. And the Nobel Prize for Physics, you can see that there's just, I think, 4 females that have received the Nobel Prize for Physics. And the last one I'll show you, I know we're getting towards the end here, and see what questions you guys have. This is actually showing the recipients. So you see it, and again, this is per prize. It never goes above 3 for at any time, because again, only 3 people get it, but the share is different. So this first one, the Nobel Prize in Physics, again, if you want to know who this is, you can right click, select underlying rows, and there is Marie Curie again. So she received the Nobel Prize as a recipient, but the prize fraction she received was 1/4. So that's what these graphs can do, and you can explore those. Okay, so here's a good question. How can one represent the different prizes when they were awarded as a heat map, a category with X year and cells coloring according to when the prize was awarded? So to do this with a heat map, what we call the scalar field command within DataGraph, you will need to have every the matrix populated for every option, and you can do this. So let's see if I can just do this on the fly for you guys. So first thing, let me go ahead actually and I'll group some of these graphs just so I can kind of hide them from view. There we go. So, so right now, if you look again at the categories, every year and every prize, you're not going to have data there because of those missing values. So if let's just do this with a brand new one. If I do a pivot on year and category, and I again just select them, do a pivot, you can see what this data looks like, what the graph looks like by default. And then say, extract result as flattened columns. Let's see if I can get this to work, right? And I think let me check with the quick graph to see, does this look like I have? So there is a section where, oh, I know what I need to do. Okay, let's say it's categorizing things here. Let's again say unique values. And you know what, this isn't quite doing it the way that I wanted to do it, because what you need is to have every one there. Oh, no, I think this is right. Yeah. So you get to see me do this a little bit on the fly. So what we need is a count for every year that we want to include for every one of these categories. And since the data set doesn't create that by default, if let me hide this laureate data from view. So what this is doing is showing me now all the years, right? Although there is one missing, but that's okay, where there were no prizes or years when no prizes were given. I have my category column and I have my flat value column. So even if, say, for example, in 1919, no one received the prize for chemistry, that's okay, because, or in terms of the scalar, again, doing a heat map, it's putting that into the data. So for example, here, this is 708 rows of data. So this is again, creating a row for every combination of year and category when the prizes were given. I hope this is making sense. Now let me show you how to put this in the heat map. So I don't really want to show the data like this. I want to, we can just go ahead and hide that. And honestly, depending on how this looks, it may make more sense to even have it based on larger time periods. But let's see what this looks like if I keep this as, let me just exclude this from view completely. If I keep this as unique values, and now I'm going to add in a scalar field. So that as the scalar field command, the scalar field, I don't think it will work. I don't think you can pre-select any data for the scalar field. So here, what we can do is, again, you can use the drag and drop technique. The value, the count of how many were given is what I'm going to put in my heat map. And then I want my X to be the year and my Y to be the category. And there it is. So now you have a heat map that is showing you a representation of the number of categories given per the number of recipients per category per year. And a couple of other things I guess we could do here. First of all, our space for the y-axis is a little too small, so I can right click here, say Y space, make this extra wide. And I maybe don't want to use the colors that are shown. So if I want to pick something that just, you know, looks a little more interesting, I can go ahead and do that. And I guess the only thing here that I will say, and I'm off the top of my head, I'm not sure the way to change this. You'll notice that the prize for the categories, it doesn't go all the way to the bottom the way that the heat map works. So this section here is just half a block, whereas for piece, it's a whole block. That's something I guess I would be curious about, thinking about how, for whether I would represent it like this. In any case, that's kind of the way that you can approach it. So it's nice that it does categories, but I didn't think that it cut off these sides like that. So that's something I'm kind of interested in seeing if there's a way to change that. One comment that's interesting, I find myself going back to SQL for large data sets and then going back to DataGraph for plotting the data set. Will there be a possibility of doing it on the command line? You know, we really have not thought seriously about doing that in terms of SQL. You should, I think, now, actually, I know you can't, I know everything you can do in SQL, you cannot do in DataGraph, but I think a vast majority of things that SQL does is possible within the program. I know there's some like union operators that you can do in SQL that DataGraph doesn't quite have, but connecting data sets is something that DataGraph does really nicely. I use that all the time. So I guess I'd be sort of curious what it is in SQL that you're missing. And because certainly if you can do it in DataGraph, then that obviously saves you a step. You can connect also to SQL databases, although this is still in the beta, and we only have it where the database has to be on a server. So that's maybe an issue for some people. But that is something if the data you're querying is a large data set that's hosted online, then we might be able to help you connect to the SQL data set. We do that with our own data. We have databases of data online that we connect to. So that is definitely something that I would recommend contacting us on the help about. And yeah, I'd be sort of interested, what is the SQL action in particular that you can't do? Partly because this works so fast. One of the things that DataGraph does actually for large data sets is it will take your text data and index it in such a way that the queries are very, very fast. So years ago, I used to do a lot of database work in Access, actually, and those databases, if you had text data and you had really, really long columns of text data, the database actions could be very, very, very slow and clunky. So we actually optimize all of that behind the scenes. I remember having to take data sets and convert all that text data into numerical values and then map them. And then I could work with really, really big data sets and it wasn't a problem. But in DataGraph, all that indexing is actually done behind the scenes. So you actually, there are some data sets that you might bring them in, and then once you start pivoting with them, DataGraph, we have some logic in there to optimize when there's a big data set, and it can actually shrink the size of your file. If you have a lot of text data that you're starting to pivot on, the program will, we have some logic in there as to when it will do this to change the data, or to change the way that it's parsing the data to make sure that it's really fast. Okay, so I think with that, we'll go ahead and end for today. And I, again, appreciate everyone with their attending. Let's see, point to a webinar on, so the question is to a webinar or give us a webinar on connecting to databases. Is that the question? Yes. Okay. We'll if you can contact me offline, if you go to the help menu and go to, well, you can just send me an email, ask a question via email. That'll go to help@visualdatatools.com. That would be great to let me know specifically the databases that you're using, if possible, so that we could kind of tailor something specific that would be useful for you. Would be great. And like I said, it is still a functionality in the beta, but I think it would be great if we could really get it to the point where it would have a a usefulness. There's a few people that have been using it, but it hasn't necessarily gotten widely adopted yet. Okay, so good. Glad if we can help you with that. And with that, I hope everyone has a good weekend, and we'll see you next time.